Hello, hello, me droogizers. Fancy a bit of the ultra gaming? I don't know, it's, doing these a while, the intros start to run a little thin, I guess. This is the Z370 Aorus Ultra Gaming. So Intel just launched a new platform, that's Intel Coffee Lake. We've got a separate video on that, and you're going to learn all about 6 cores on the desktop, 6 cores in the i5 part, 6 cores, 6 threads, 6 cores in the i7 part, and 12 threads. So we've got the 6 core, 6 thread i5 part here in the Z370 Aorus Ultra Gaming. The i7 will work totally fine. We're going to take a look at this board, the features that it has, do a bunch of Linux testing, and, all of that. Let's get right into it. So let's get right into the new socket. This motherboard has the all-new socket 1151. Wait, that's not new at all. That was what was on Z170 and Z270. But it's not compatible. This is compatible only to Z370 chipset with the 8th generation Core i5, i3, i7 CPU family. You're not going to be able to use a 6 or 7 series CPU on this one, whereas Z270 was backward compatible with Z170, Z370, not backward compatible with anything, except of course your PCI Express peripherals. Not really a lot has changed in terms of the chipset either. In fact, the chipset has not changed at all in terms of the DMI interface between the CPU and the PCH. This is going to be really important, not just for this motherboard review, but for all motherboard reviews, because you've still only got 4 gigabytes per second read and write from the CPU to the chipset. Now the chipset does actually add some more PCI Express 3.0 lanes, so that motherboard manufacturers can add more PCI Express 3.0 peripherals, but all of the peripherals that are connected through the PCH are going to be using that one PCI Express 3.0 by 4 interface. This particular motherboard will run by 16 or by 8 by 8 for the 2 armored PCI Express slots, which is great that they're armored and reinforced. They're made for heavier graphics cards. They're also RGB. I've got everything configured for red here because that's sort of what you get out of the box. You get PCH, you got this replaceable strip at the front of the motherboard. You can put whatever patterns you want there on that. So yeah, this motherboard is a little bit RGB crazy. It's RGB Fusion. It also supports digital programmable LED strips. Yeah, you don't have to just settle for one color in your LED strips and have the different zones for the different strips. You can have each individual LED on the strip its own color, so you can go nuts with whatever RGB-ness you want to build. We're doing things a little out of order here on this motherboard review, but that's okay, because hey, it's a new platform. Things have got to be different, right? There is one physical by 16 slot that is a by 4 electrical, and it goes through the PCH, so that's good for your by 4 devices, like maybe a PCI Express capture card or something like that. We've got 3 PCI Express 3.0 by 1 slots. All 3 of those are through the PCH. And we've got 2 M.2. Those are both PCI Express 3.0, support SATA, the whole 9 yards. Works really well. Both of those are through the PCH. So you may be thinking, wait a minute, if I get a bunch of really high-speed peripherals, like maybe I'm going to run M.2 RAID with 2 Samsung 960 EVOs or the OCZ RD400, that's what we did our testing with, and won't that bottleneck? And the answer is yes. Yes, it will. You can expect, if you're running a RAID 0 array, to get about 3,900 megabytes per second in our testing and for the RAID array. If you run a 3-drive RAID array, it's still going to be 3,900 megabytes per second, unless the data is compressible, like you're just reading and writing all zeros. That's not a very fair benchmark now, is it? So yeah, dual drives may be okay. You can do RAID 1 M.2, and depending on your software, the reads will stack on RAID 1. So if you need to read in a whole bunch of data and your program is smart enough to spawn more than one read thread, you can totally get 3,900 megabytes per second read speed from your RAID 1 NVMe, even though it's not RAID 0. Now write speed's a different story. Write speed's still going to be the speed of your slowest NVMe, but hey, that's okay. It's totally fine. We can live with that. Works pretty well. Let's take a look at the back panel I/O. At the back of the motherboard, we got a combo PS2 mouse and keyboard port. We've got 2 USB 3.0 DAC up ports. These DAC ports provide, isolated DC power if you're going to use a USB audio DAC or something like that you want to use with, really high-end headphones and you've got a really high-end audio setup. These USB ports will provide steadier DC power than the other DC jacks on the motherboard. Then we've got our DVI connector because, hey, this generation does have onboard video with the Intel iGPU, which is kind of exciting in the Linux category, but we'll talk more about Linux in a minute. Then we've got our red USB slots. Now this is USB 3.1 Gen 2, 10 gigabits per second, one Type A and one Type C. And of course you do have the front panel Type C connection as well. And then right next to that, we've got our USB 3.0, that's USB 3.1 Gen 1, the protocol, and our HDMI interface for our iGPU. Then we've got our Intel Gigabit NIC. Just below that, we've got two more USB 2.0 ports. Then right next to that, we've got our audio solution. Now this is a Realtek ALC 1220 with optical SPDIF. It is a 120 dB signal to noise ratio, and it also has an audio amp up, which is, Gigabyte special sauce in terms of their audio solution. It also has the really high grade red audio capacitors. Those are the WiMA audio capacitors. So that solution is on an isolated part of the PCB. So hopefully that'll be immune from noise and that sort of thing. Quickie testing sounded pretty good to me, but I'm no audiophile. If you want a higher end sound card, well, people will go with the USB DAC. Let's take a look at our audio connections. On the bottom edge of the board, we've got our front panel audio connections. Then right next to that, we've got our digital LED strip header. We've got our analog RGB strip header. That is an RGBW strip header, so you can use white or the reactive UV LEDs or one of the fancier LED strips that doesn't just have RGB LEDs, but also has the extra LEDs as well. Then we've got an input header if you've got a USB battery pack for just showing off the RGB functionality. Then we've got two USB 2.0 headers, two 4-pin fan headers. These are DC fan compatible, so you can run a 3-pin DC fan if you would like. Got our front panel connector, and it does include the G connector in the box so that you can plug your front panel connections into the G connector and then just plug the whole G connector in to the motherboard, and it works fine. Then next to our front panel connections, we've got two SATA 6 gigabit per second ports. At the front edge of the motherboard, we've got four more SATA 6 gigabit per second ports. And then sliding up the board toward the 24-pin ATX power connector, we've got the USB 3.1 front panel audio connector, as well as a standard 30-pin USB 3.1 Gen 1 connector as well. Just past the 24-pin power connector, we've got another RGBW, RGB LED header strip, and they've got another digital RGB header strip as well, and also a 4-pin fan header. And then just behind the 4 DDR4 memory slots, we've got another two 4-pin fan headers. This is made for, your push-pull CPU cooler, maybe a water pump and a CPU cooler or auxiliary fan or whatever you might be running. And finally, we've got our 8-pin CPU power. Now, I know what you're thinking. Yeah, tell me about overclockability. Tell me about the platform. Tell me about all the other stuff. Well, good news. Coffee Lake is more similar to the 7700K architecture than it is the 7900X. And that's good news for gamers that are looking for insanely high frame rates at, like 1080p resolutions. When we were looking at 1080p on the Ryzen platform, even though the Ryzen CPU was faster, could get more computations done, it wasn't faster for things like GTA 5. And so, the collective internet, lost its mind and all this stuff. Well, and then a few months later, the Intel 7900X came out, and it suffered from a lot of the same problems, though not as badly, because it's a little bit more of a hybrid design than the design of Ryzen 7. But the benchmarks are now out on the 16, 18 core Intel parts. The situation's a little worse, and also the situation's a little worse on Threadripper, depending on which version, which mode you've got Threadripper in, NUMA versus UMA. Well, this is 6-core, and because this is closer in architecture and in layout, in simplicity, I guess you would say, because this platform is really not nearly as complicated as the other platforms, with the possible exception of Ryzen 7 and Ryzen 5. You're in a situation where it actually does compete. It actually is really fast. The problem now is overclocking. You've got 6 cores you've got to deal with instead of 4. And so far, I've only have 3 CPUs to test with. I've only tested on 3 CPUs so far. And the overclocking doesn't seem to be super great. I don't know if these are cherry-picked CPUs or what exactly the CPU situation is. I fly a little bit under the radar on this kind of stuff. So I don't have enough CPUs to really say what the situation is. And I haven't heard back from my contacts with various board vendors in terms of what they're seeing, because they've gone through hundreds of CPUs by the time this platform is released. So I think the jury is still out a little bit. 4.6 on the 6-core i5 was pretty stable, and that's nothing to sneeze at. And that will beat the performance of, like Ryzen 7 1600. That said, the CPU's a little bit more expensive than, 1600, 1600X. So your mileage may vary. This is by no means definitive. It's just a very early look in terms of like performance benchmarks, that sort of thing. But it is a very solid offering from Intel, especially in the 6-core department. Now, in terms of like the 4-core stuff, I would not consider a 4-core on this platform at all. Like, it's just not even something that would be on my radar. It's definitely not future-proof. I mean, we're talking, Sandy Bridge came out over 5 years ago. Sandy Bridge CPUs from Intel. Those were the 2000 series. Those were 4-core CPUs that were really squeezing as much as you possibly could out of a 4-core in terms of overclockability, in terms of chip features, in terms of everything else. Most of the successive generations since then have been improvements around I/O and improvements around performance and that sort of thing. Coffee Lake is not really a response to Ryzen either. I mean, that grabs the headlines and that's clickbait, but the fact is that 3 years of CPU engineering does not happen overnight in response to a competitor's product. This is just common sense. I think everybody knows that. That said, I do think the timeline for Coffee Lake was accelerated just a bit. And because of that, I think that there are a few things on the platform that are not quite done, that are not quite polished. So the Linux testing, the LAN, and the audio solution with a new enough Linux kernel, those worked fine. I really wanted to test the iGPU because, hey, SR-IOV is supported by the Intel Onboard GPU. And if you're not really sure what that is, that's a technology that lets you share a single GPU between the real host machine and a virtual machine. In the enterprise, it means something slightly different. You can have one GPU that are used by many different people accessing a server. And I was not able to do that. There are, you can enable VTD, but everything was in one IOMMU group. I do have a ticket open with Gigabyte, and we're working on it, sort of between R&D and that sort of thing. So if this is something that you're interested in, you probably should make yourselves heard. Probably on Reddit at RVFIO. Of course, you're welcome in the Level 1 text forums. But if that is the type of thing that you're looking to do, I mean, this should be a great platform to do it, especially with 6 cores. That's also not insanely expensive. You throw in a GPU or two, plus the iGPU that supports SR-IOV, that'd be a pretty nice little workstation without breaking the bank. Especially if you can get by on only 6 cores. And hey, I don't know. I know nothing on the inside, but there was a rumor that Intel was also working on an 8-core part for this platform. That is not a guarantee. That is just a rumor. Don't know about that. Something I read on the internet. I don't know if it's true. So maybe that would be something as well. The 6-core performance on this is really good. I mean, considering I would like to see 4.8, 5 gigahertz attainable in terms of an overclock. I'd like to see a little bit better Linux support, but I think that's just because the platform is so new. So if the Linux support is something you're interested in, we will definitely do follow-up videos. You can find those on the Linux channel, the Level 1 Linux channel, so that kind of stuff. All in all, the verdict, this is a solid board. I'm really impressed with the board. I'm really impressed with how polished the product is from day one. Yeah, there's some rough edges, but I think these are things that are going to be fixed pretty quickly, probably in the next couple of weeks, I'd say. So if you want to wait and see and post back a comment or ask on the Level 1 text forums, then yeah, I think we can figure that out. But as far as launches go, this is probably the more exciting launch because this is the everyman CPU. I mean, these CPUs on this socket, on the 1151 socket, are going to outsell the 2066 socket CPUs 10 to 1 probably. So this is where most of the engineering attention is where most of the trouble tickets are going to be created. Same is true of AMD. I mean, the Ryzen 7 and Ryzen 5 CPUs are likely to outsell 10 to 1 the Threadripper CPUs, but the Threadripper CPUs are really nice. Now, things in the server market might be a different story. There may be some abject panic going on in server land. I don't know. That's a video for another time. So all in all, really impressive motherboard. Big thanks to Gigabyte for helping me put this together and answering my questions and dealing with my super nerdery. So my hat's off to you guys. Good work. I really like this board. I think it's a solid board. So I'm Wendell. I'm signing out, and you can find me in the Level 1 text forums. If you pick one of these up and you have some experiences with it and you want to share, please do. We'll see you there.